Hey everyone, and welcome. We're diving deep today into the world of surveillance, and it's probably a lot bigger than most people think.
It really is. I mean, it's everywhere.
Yeah, we're basing this deep dive on an article called "The Growing Reach of Surveillance and Its Implications." And one of the things that really jumped out at me, it said there are something like 15,000 surveillance cameras in New York City,
15,000.
just in New York City.
Yeah, and a lot of them are using facial recognition technology too.
It's kind of wild, right? Like, imagine just walking through Times Square.
Yeah.
You're on camera pretty much constantly.
Well, yeah, and it's not just passive observation either. The NYPD has used facial recognition in over 22,000 cases.
So it's really being used.
It is.
Wow. It makes you think,
Right.
right? Like everywhere we go, how many cameras are actually watching us?
Right. It's not always obvious.
Speaking of not obvious, the article talks about this app that can track your location using sounds. Sounds you can't even hear.
It sounds like something straight out of a spy movie. Totally. How does that even work?
So basically, the app sends out these high-frequency sounds that our ears can't pick up, but smartphone microphones can. And by measuring how those sounds bounce back, it can figure out where you are.
So even if your GPS is off.
Yeah, even if your GPS is off, it's pretty remarkable.
And kind of freaky. Okay, so we've got cameras everywhere and apps that can track us through sound. What about all the stuff we do online? I mean, we've all heard about Google and Facebook tracking us,
Oh,
right?
yeah, they're definitely tracking us. And it's not just about those personalized ads we see either. It's much bigger than that. It's what's known as surveillance capitalism.
Surveillance capitalism. Okay, now that sounds kind of ominous.
It is. It's a system where our personal data is the product. Companies collect all this information about us, our search history, the websites we visit, our social media activity, and then they use it to predict our behavior and sell it to advertisers or other companies.
So they're basically building a digital profile of us without us even knowing it.
Exactly. And the scale of it is mind-blowing. Did you know that Google alone tracks user data on 92% of the most visited websites worldwide?
92%. That's almost the entire internet.
It is.
I mean, it's a little scary, isn't it, to think that they have access to all that information about us?
It is a bit unnerving, yeah. It raises a lot of questions about privacy and how our data is being used.
Okay, so we've got cameras, sneaky apps, and big tech companies collecting all this data on us. How did we even get here?
Well, it's a complex story, but it definitely goes back to events like 9/11 and the passage of the Patriot Act.
The Patriot Act, that was a big deal, right?
Yeah, it was. In the wake of 9/11, there was this heightened sense of fear, and people were willing to give up certain freedoms in the name of security. The Patriot Act basically expanded the government's surveillance powers, giving them more access to our personal data.
So in a way, we kind of opened the door to more surveillance ourselves.
In a way, yes. And at the same time, companies like Google were just getting started with all their data collection practices.
It's like it all sort of happened at the same time, this perfect storm of, I don't know, technology and fear. And well, now we're in this world where it feels like we're constantly being watched.
That's a pretty accurate assessment.
Wow. Okay, I think we need a moment to process all of this. We've covered cameras, sneaky apps, the Patriot Act, and this whole idea of surveillance capitalism.
And we're just getting started.
Right, we'll be back in part 2 to delve even deeper into what all this means for our privacy and our freedom. Stay tuned.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about how 9/11 and the Patriot Act really changed how surveillance and data collection work. The article also brought up something called PRISM. What's that exactly?
Yeah, PRISM is kind of the poster child for how blurry the lines have become between the government and these big tech companies when it comes to surveillance. Basically, it lets the NSA, the National Security Agency, collect data straight from the servers of companies like Google and Facebook, Microsoft, Apple, all the big ones. Wait, so straight from their servers?
Yeah.
So they're getting into our emails and chats and everything without like a warrant or anything.
Yeah, they can kind of bypass the usual legal stuff and just get tons of data without having to go through the courts. It's been pretty controversial, to say the least.
Yeah, I can imagine. Some people probably say it's necessary for national security, but others, well, they probably see it as a huge invasion of privacy.
Exactly. And it's all very hush-hush.
Yeah.
We don't really know the full extent of what they're doing or how much data they're collecting.
Like we're stuck in this tug of war between security and privacy, and it's our own personal information that's being pulled back and forth.
That's a great way to put it. And it's a debate that's only going to get more intense, right? Technology keeps advancing, surveillance gets more sophisticated.
Yeah, you have to wonder where it's all headed.
And it's not just, the government doing this stuff directly. They've figured out that they can outsource a lot of the data collection to private companies.
How does that work? How does outsourcing get around, the Constitution and people's rights?
Well, it's a legal thing. If the government itself isn't the one collecting the data, they can say, well, we're not the ones doing the surveillance.
Yeah.
But then they can still get that data from the
Yeah, it's
companies.
like a loophole.
Exactly. A
Hmm.
loophole. They can get around the Constitution and access tons of information without having to jump through all the legal hoops. And this is where, surveillance capitalism comes back into play.
Right. So it's bigger than just those targeted ads. It's about like the government and these companies having all this data about us and using it for who knows what.
Okay, so we've talked about how our data is being collected. But what does it all mean for us, just regular people? Is privacy even possible anymore?
Well, we all crave privacy, right? It's fundamental to who we are. It affects our sense of independence, our relationships, our ability to just be ourselves without worrying about being judged or, getting in trouble for saying the wrong thing.
But are we giving all that up just by using the internet? I don't think it has to be all or nothing. We do have to make some trade-offs to be online, but we can still have some privacy. It starts with being aware, understanding how our data is being collected. Once we know the risks, then we can make better choices.
Like what? What can we do?
Well, we can be careful about what we share online, right? Think about the apps we use. And there are things like strong passwords and encryption that can help protect our data.
So, being more mindful of our digital footprint, does it really make a difference?
It does. It all adds up. And we can demand more from the companies and the government too.
Hmm.
Push for better privacy laws, more transparency, make them accountable for data breaches. We have more power than we think. We just have to use it.
I like that. It can feel overwhelming, but we're not totally powerless. Okay, we've covered a lot in this part. We talked about PRISM, the government outsourcing data collection, and what all this means for our personal privacy.
Yeah, some pretty heavy stuff.
When we come back in part 3, we'll look at the bigger picture, how all this affects society as a whole, and what we can do to navigate this new world of surveillance.
Welcome back to the deep dive. So we've spent a lot of time talking about how surveillance works, all the different ways it's happening. But now I want to talk about like what does it all mean, for society as a whole?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? I mean, it's one thing to talk about cameras and data collection, but the real concern is what happens to our freedom.
Right. You mentioned freedom of expression earlier. If we feel like we're constantly being watched,
Yeah.
does that make us less likely to actually speak our minds?
Absolutely. It's called a chilling effect. If you think that anything you say or do online or even offline is being monitored, you're gonna be much more hesitant to express opinions that might be considered controversial or to, criticize those in power.
So it's not just about like direct censorship. It's more like we censor ourselves. Exactly. Self-censorship. And it goes beyond just, political speech too. It can stifle creativity, innovation. If people are afraid to stand out, to be different, then, we end up with a society that's all about conformity.
Right. Everybody just trying to fit in, not make any waves. That's not good for anyone.
Mm.
And what about like our relationships with each other? Does surveillance affect how we interact with, our friends and family?
It can, definitely. When you have this underlying feeling of being watched and judged all the time, it erodes trust. You become more suspicious of people, less open to sharing your thoughts and feelings.
And that's how, communities start to break down, people become isolated.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like this vicious cycle.
Yeah.
Surveillance leads to distrust, distrust leads to isolation, and pretty soon, we've lost that sense of connection that makes society function.
This is kind of depressing. Is there anything we can do about it? It feels like such a huge, overwhelming problem.
It is a big problem. But, it's not hopeless. Awareness is always the first step. The more we understand about surveillance, the more we can, start demanding change. We need stronger privacy laws, more transparency from the government and from corporations.
It's a combination of things, right? Individual actions and bigger systemic change.
Right. We can all do our part, by being careful about what we share online, choosing privacy-focused tools and services. And at the same time, we need to be pushing for real change at the policy level.
It sounds like a lot of work, but I guess, freedom is worth fighting for.
It absolutely is. And the more people who speak up, the more pressure we put on those in power to actually do something about it.
Well, this has been quite a deep dive. I'm definitely feeling a little more informed, but also a little more, I don't know, unsettled, I guess.
Yeah, it's not the most cheerful topic, but it's an important one. We have to keep talking about it, keep learning about it, and keep fighting for a future where privacy and freedom are actually valued.
I agree. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey into the world of surveillance. It's a complex issue and it's not going away anytime soon. So stay informed, stay engaged, and stay vigilant. And I